Okay, friends, thanks once again for joining me. And this week we're moving on and kind of developing from last week's topic, which was teaching preteens and younger teens, and onto teaching older teens. And quite a lot of what I said last week will be relevant and adaptable for older teens. And so there'll be a little bit of repetition of what I'm saying, but no harm, I don't think, because teaching children is such a difficult and important and rewarding subject. It's no harm to get the lessons hammered in a couple of times, I don't think. Nevertheless, there are specifics to do with teaching older teens in my experience, which are vital to understanding before you set out on that particular journey. If that is your thing, and it may not be, it may be that teaching older teens in particular is not your thing. It requires, as I've said up there at the top line, patience, and really quite an enormous amount of patience, I think, because kids, obviously, teenagers are going through puberty. They are, badly served as a group, I suppose, in our communities and in our society, and often they will be bringing to a classroom stuff that in a better society would be kind of dealt with outside the classroom. They have issues and problems. They are developing at different rates. They're in various states of, confusion, depression, anxiety, special needs, all that sort of stuff comes up with teenagers. And they also can be very cheeky and brazen and uncooperative, especially in schools, in whole school groups. When you have them in summer camps and libraries and youth clubs and stuff like that, the discipline and behaviour issues is such a big deal. But it will be if you go into schools quite often. And you will also have a situation with teenagers where you might be having to teach at 6 or 7 paces at the same time, and you might even have to be teaching 6 or 7 different types of exercise or different types of genres at the same time if you're going to build up that inclusivity, which is so important. Empathy kind of comes with the patience, so that you're capable of emotionally identifying with where a child is at and where they're creating out of, and overall you're kind of a sympathetic person. You need to be doing an awful lot of various exercises, various genres, and various activities with teenagers. No point doing the same thing with them all the time. No point doing with them what they're kind of used to as their creative writing exercise in school, which will be the 19th century forms of the page poem, the short story, and to a certain extent the novel. And you'll find that kids, I've met kids at the age of 14 who've written 5 or 6 novels as well, so don't be surprised by the amount of writing that kids have already done on their own. But you as a teacher need to be bringing a lot of movement into the class, basically, and kinetic energy, and kinetic movement and kinetic learning. Learning by moving, learning by doing is very, very important for teens, and you need to be very much a high energy person yourself. Again, you need to have a think about, are you that high energy person? You will need to focus on teen issues and interests, and build up your exercises and design your own exercises out of that. So a little bit of familiarity with current teen culture. What kind of stuff they're watching on TV, what kind of books they're reading, what kind of music they're following, what kind of events they're interested in, what kind of current affairs are they debating and stuff like that. You need to be aware of that, and you need to be kind of client-centered in terms of that. Okay. That's something that is pretty tough, really, I think, because, there are kind of eternal issues or eternal things that teenagers are interested in, to do with, for example, exploring identity and things like that we can make use of in the creative writing class. But there are also current issues and current phases and current moods in teenagers and in society in general. For example, the last couple of years, gender identity has become a huge thing with kids. And if you can find a way of kind of, integrating that into your exercises and making a safe place for all of that to be, explored, you'll get yourself on side with teens and you'll bring out some really, really brilliant work. So, are you the kind of person that can do that type of thing? Working with teenage boys, my third line there is about braggadocio and what I call the vomit phase. If you go into whole school groups with teenage boys, you will find that they like to show off, and especially because you're kind of new, you're kind of a mark for them. So they will, be brazen and cheeky, a couple of them, and be vulgar and talk about sex, drugs and rock and roll, and that's what I call the vomit phase. Often comes up with teenage boys and whole school groups. You have to hold tough and let it pass, and you will find often that the kids that are the brazenest and the cheekiest will turn out to be also some of the most creative and the most useful to you as well. And building up experience is a good idea before you take on going into schools and whole class groups, and I would recommend you probably do some voluntary work with teens before you kind of dive in at the deep end there. Okay, contemporary genres. Again, this is very important for us as creative writing teachers. The institutions that have kind of to do with education and creative writing, literary NGOs / charities, and the Department of Education and so on and so forth, they really haven't got much of an idea about where literature is heading now, especially where it's heading with teenagers. And the page poem, the little poem in the book, the short story, and that kind of 19th century idea of creative writing, that kind of text idea, that book-bound idea of creative writing is kind of not where kids are at and not what they're doing. Performance poetry is a big, much bigger, 100 million times bigger and more interesting for kids and better for kids than page poetry, I should say, as well. Manga and comic strips, podcasts and vlogging. That's what you want to be teaching teenagers, not your 19th century forms. And, that's important that you understand that. And to be able to do that, you will need to be, some bit skilled at multimedia. We're going to have a little talk about multimedia in a couple of minutes and the basic setup gear that you need to do, and maybe you need to do a little bit of training as well. But definitely you need to know how to make a video, edit a video, and you need to know how to make a podcast and edit a podcast, and you need to know how to mess around with photographs and add text to photos and do memes and make posters, and you need to be able to teach how to do that, in fact. So there's probably a bit of learning in it for some of you, others there won't be. Pair, group and collaborative. Again, huge mistake, the idea that creative writing is something that individuals do alone. Very much the case in the 19th and 20th century. But even in those eras, plays, operas, TV series, films, animations, the amount of creative writing that is actually done collaboratively and group is about 90% as to the 10% that might write on their own. And it much suits most kids to work in pairs, groups and collaboratively around the table. Not all, but most. Skill mixing then also very important. So you, even more so than with your junior kids, you have to find a way to integrate the musician, the drawer, the loud kid, the quiet kid, the good writer, the good organizer, all of those people into your classroom inclusive strategy. And we need to be aware with teenagers. Once again, another repetition, but I think worth saying that our role really isn't to, shall we say, produce the next Anne Enright or Colm Tóibín or anything kind of silly like that. It's our kind of not city's the wrong word, but sort of you're not thinking really about creative writing if that's what you think you're doing, but to build the self-confidence, the creative confidence, we're trying to build the confidence kids. We're trying to help them to explore, expand, and utilize their natural born creative capacities and make them feel good about doing that. So making the kids feel good is the most important thing, not being a literary critic, not your job, and a bit of a pointless job, all told, even if it was your job. So, don't do that. Ethical, again, comes back to that, are we going to be 21st century or 19th century teachers? There's little point in an ethical sense, and in a sustainable sense, and thinking about the future of the kid in focusing your efforts on kind of short stories and poems, as might have been the case, or maybe you thought that was what you were going to be doing. There's no future in those genres. There's no living in those genres. There's no audience for those genres. And overall, they're kind of creatively exhausted by human beings at this stage. So you're much better putting the focus on the contemporary genres where kids have some chance of making their own impact and some chance of some kind of living and some kind of sustainability if they do get into them. Now, you might say to me, well, who are you to be saying that? Well, I worked for the RTE Poetry program when Ricochet was presented for a couple of years, and our maximum audience was around 600 people, and around 75% of those are over the age of 60, we found out. So there's no such thing as an audience for that type of poetry. It just doesn't exist, statistically non-existent. I'm the lead mentor for The Stinging Fly, which is the main short story publisher and magazine in the country. There's no audience for us either. There's way more people. I mean, I would say 10 times more people writing short stories than there was reading them. So, just think about what you're doing for your kids. What are you giving them? Are you equipping them for the future of creativity? Or are you equipping them for some sort of mystical past that didn't really exist? And we need to think about the ethics of that. So, that's my argument really, for you to kind of update your skills in terms of multimedia. So that you'll be what I would really consider a fully ethical teacher in that regard. Alter ego I've put down there because an awful lot of exercises with teenagers that I do are to do with exploring identity and alternative identities, and about who you are and who you might be, or who you might want to be, or who you wouldn't want to be, and dressing up and all kinds of things. And alter ego is huge among kids. They often have seven or eight alter egos in their heads anyway. So you're pushing at an open door when you do alter ego stuff with them. That's one of the key kind of exercises that I do with them. Okay, well, I'm kind of sorry if this is bad news to anybody or seems like a hell of a lot of other work to take on, but I'm afraid that if you don't kind of update yourself to some extent at least, and in the fundamentals and the basics of multimedia gear and multimedia production, you really won't be putting yourself in a good position for working with contemporary teens all of the time, and more also contemporary adults. The young, it should be added, are the leaders in the arts and the leaders in innovation, and they always have been. So it's very important to take your lead in terms of the arts from the under 30s rather than the over 60s, even though they're the people who get a lot of the institutional support and so on. Speaking as a practicing artist, it's always to the young that I look rather than to the seniors, if you like, and multimedia is where it's at now. The essential equipment that you need, and again, I'm very sorry for Android people and people who don't have Apple gear, but Apple is the best gear for creative work, and a serious teacher will make an investment in that gear if you're going to be working with teens. So ideally you would have both an iPad Mini 4 and an iPhone 7 Plus. But one or either would do, and if you have to choose one, get the iPhone 7 Plus because the camera is better than on the iPad Mini 4. Both devices are basically, the most powerful creative devices ever invented by human beings. You can do audio creativity, textual creativity, photographic creativity, animation creativity, video creativity, all of those things on the one device. You don't need anything else really. Although the few things that I've got underneath here will enhance your experience when working with this gear. So I would add on to the basic production machine that the iPhone Plus or the iPad Mini is. I would add an set of Ollie-Clip clip-on lenses. They give you three different clip-on lenses to put on top of your iPad or your iPhone and clip over the camera there, and that would be a wide-angle lens, a telephoto lens, a macro lens, a fisheye lens as well, and that can add a lot of fun to your videography work with teenagers, and really the kids will love playing with that sort of stuff as well, and coming up with their own creative stuff. And maybe it's a good idea to have a few sets of those lenses that you can distribute to kids if you've got a one-off class and so on. Audio, when you're working with video or you're doing podcast, obviously audio is supremely important. No point having a good video if you can't make out what's being said, and normally, especially if you're going working outside, and I do recommend that you work with kids outside in the good weather and get them walking around and doing walking and writing exercises and things like that. If you're working with kids outside and you're doing recording, you're going to need a clip-on mic, and you will get one for about 70 quid. You get a Rode clip-on smartphone mic, which the one I use and which I recommend there, and underneath you can see the mini projector on the left hand side of the screen there in the photograph. I recommend that you get a mini projector. Mini projectors are really handy for teaching. You can attach them to your iPad, and you can give a key point or PowerPoint presentation. You can show, for example, videos of performance poets to get a class on performance poetry going, and you can also use them to display your outcomes. So if you make a little video or you do some posters or you do a web story or whatever it might be with the teenagers, then at the end of the day you can project either for their own satisfaction or for a little show for their guardians and parents and stuff like that. Last thing you might need, and which is a good idea, is one of these flexible gorilla pods or tripods. You can see one in the corner there. You should pick up one for about 40 quid. That'll give you a bit of flexibility in terms of where you place the camera and things like that. So I mean, if you go into the kids and you have some idea how to use all this stuff and what to do with it and how to integrate it, you're going to be putting yourself on side and opening out your possibilities as a creativity teacher. And I really, really do recommend that if you're not interested in multimedia and you're not willing to learn about it, and it's just something that you feel that it is not for you, then I would not work with teenagers. I'd stick to adults, and to be honest with you, I'd stick to your over 40s and your over 50s now at this stage. By the way, I've had some great classes in the last year teaching multimedia creativity to over 55s, and I don't mean to say that older people aren't interested in it. They may not have picked up the skills because it wasn't relevant to them in their the main part of their working life, but they are interested. But anyway, if you're going to work with teenagers, it means you're working with multimedia, and that's just a fact of life. And you won't be a good teacher of creativity if you don't pick up on that. With teenagers, you may be great with people who aren't teenagers. Okay, so here are some of the essential apps, 6 essential apps, I think, for multimedia work with kids. The first 2 on the top are photographic apps, which allow you to manipulate photographs, edit photographs, crop photographs, and crucially add text to photographs and blend photographs, so you can make a kind of a photo story with them, which is something that teenagers enjoy doing, especially if the photographs are of themselves acting things out and stuff like that. So Fonto is the red little app there. It's free. Phonto. Photoshop Express is the blue, or several blues app on the top right there, and they're both free and can be downloaded in a couple of seconds. For video, underneath you've got the star there, signifies iMovie, and that should come free with your iPad Mini 4 or your iPhone 7 Plus, and there are plenty of tutorials on YouTube about how to use that. It's a very intuitive app, and if you have a few goes on it, you'll quickly be able to edit quite good videos, professional quality videos indeed, if you use the mic and the lenses as I spoke about earlier. Underneath that then you see YouTube. I do recommend that you get your own YouTube channel, simply because you want to be uploading your multimedia work in video. You don't have to share your YouTube videos with the world. You can set them as unlisted and simply share them to the people who have the links. So something I would do, for example, with a lot of kids now, a lot of TY kids, and which schools tend to like, is to do a kind of a time capsule video with kids, where you choose a team and each kid has a few lines on the team, and then instead of their sort of class photograph, they've got a class video that they can look back in 20 or 30 years time, and that's pleasing. That idea is pleasing to a lot of kids, a lot of schools, a lot of parents, and it's quite popular, I find. You'll need your YouTube channel for that, simply to upload the stuff and to store your video as well, because storing video takes up a lot of storage. YouTube doesn't set limits on the amount of videos you can put up, so it's very handy for that, and I do recommend it. And you also can use your own YouTube channel as a teaching resource, where you can put playlists of particular types of genres that you're teaching, and refer back to them, and indeed use them as a teaching resource entirely. Audacity, you'll see in the middle there on the right, that's a free audio editing device, with our app, which I recommend. The kids will probably, some of them will be familiar with it. Indeed, they'll be familiar with an awful lot of these applications, and might even be using them themselves. But if you're doing your podcast or recording a little song, or doing a storytelling exercise where you're recording the storytelling, or anything that involves audio, school radio project or something like that, then you will use Audacity to edit it and make the sound a lot better. Free app. Fabulous app for free, basically. So download that and have a go at it and see how good you are at it. And you can store your audio similarly to YouTube without kind of limits in terms of storage. It can set the pieces to audio is not so important as video, really. Nobody's going to be really hung up with their voices on the internet, so you don't really have to worry too much about consent or setting it to public or private there. But all the same, you can set it to kind of unlisted on SoundCloud as well. So I mean, again, have a go off of these apps, have a look at them, think about what you can do with them creatively, and if you can use all of these apps properly for education, the kids will pick these up. If they don't know them already, they'll pick them up in a couple of minutes if you explain it properly, and you can have a lot of fun with these and a lot of productivity, and again, relevant to the world we live in, because all of these skills, particularly the video skills and the audio skills, are going to be relevant to so many jobs. I mean, there won't be a job you won't need video for before long, in the same way that there's no job now that you don't need maths and English for, and video in particular is the new literacy, and it's really important that you do teach that, and you do learn about it yourself. Okay, so just a few things about getting setting up for teens, setting the room up, and kind of setting the atmosphere up, so that you will get the most out of working with older teens. A couple of keywords there at the top: collaboration. You got to set the room up for collaboration. In other words, is kids have to be sitting around kind of tables in groups of 3 or 4. A little bit careful about avoiding cliques, especially if you're coming in on top of teens that all know each other already, as you would be in schools. So, again, a little bit of pre-work there in terms of talking to the teacher about who not to sit with who, because maybe there's a bit of bullying going on or some history there. But you should, and to the extent that you can, and it's not kind of disturbing, the class, it's okay to let kids kind of sit voluntarily where they want to sit. But if it's kind of starkly obvious that the kids who are sitting together are not going to do anything, then you're going to kind of split them up, obviously. So, but anyway, in any case, whatever you decide there, make sure that the room is set up for kids to be kind of working together. The room and particularly the seating should be comfortable, and there's no harm having a couple of bean bags or anything like that, to give it the atmosphere of a relaxed sort of cafe atmosphere is really good. The type of room that you need obviously would be your library in your school, basically. And on sunny days, when it's possible, you should bring the kids outside to work. Definitely, okay? And that brings us to movement as another key idea. Kinetic learning, you'll have heard about, I guess, if you've ever taught drama or done your HDIP. But kids learn from doing. They like to move around, and there should be plenty of room for movement and plenty of exercises, which get kids moving around the room and not just sitting down. And like I say, take them outside whenever possible, and if you have the space and time. An awful lot of work can be done outside. Just getting to know kids, a couple of things underneath there that I found useful. It's very hard to remember everybody's name, especially if you're meeting new kids pretty regularly. And now that we're in the multicultural area, it's getting harder and harder to remember people's names because we're kind of unfamiliar with a lot of them. So I will get kids either to write their names on a little piece of paper in front of them, or to tell us who they are, when they speak and so on, and help you to remember and be kind of honest about the fact you find it hard to remember names or whatever it is. But make sure that they don't feel upset because you haven't remembered their name, because they can be very sensitive, as you could imagine. A little fun exercise I do, which I would do if I'm meeting talented teens. That's teens that I would define as kind of voluntarily coming to summer camps or after school classes or something like that. I wouldn't use this with a whole class. If I know I've got kids who are already interested in writing, I would get them to, instead of giving us their real name, give us their fake name, their pseudonym, or make up a name for themselves. And that can be great fun because kids, and you can find out a little bit about kids, obviously, about who they decide they want to be. You can find out, for example, about the kids' identity, or if they're a girl and they call themselves a boy's name or something like that. So you can kind of find out a lot and make people comfortable in the room by allowing that expression of identity. And then you can go on and do more exercises, warm exercises, where they each interview each other about the alter ego that they've just brought up for themselves. And that's a good way to get kids going and interested in each other and get them personally sort of intimate with each other's alter egos without any actual personal questions being asked, So teenagers will communicate indirectly a lot, and that's what they use creativity for and creative writing for a lot, and that's really cool, and you should work with that. What I would do with kids as well is to get to know a little bit and indirectly get to know them and profile them indirectly, and to get them comfortable. It all works together is to first, when I meet them, first do up a class playlist. That's the favourite song or two of the kids that they want to be, kind of have playing at the break time or as they're coming in the morning and stuff like that. So kids, you'll find out from kids, what kind of mood they're in or what their current disposition is from their favourite song lyrics. You can talk about those or their favourite song, and you get a good idea about the personality of the kids from that. I would always, especially with a whole class group in schools, which I'm kind of at pains to explain is a different ball game to working with kids who are volunteering to be there and who are interested in writing. Your whole class group, most of them won't be interested in writing, and you kind of have to explain the principle of mutual respect as nicely as you possibly can. whereby the kids are asked to listen to each other when they're reading out their pieces, and to not be too noisy or disturbing other people. And it's no harm pointing that out at the beginning. Like I said already, they're comfortable seating and plenty of room. Board and mark are very important. Okay, board work is pretty important with teens. Because you're going to have to explain things quite often if you're teaching a genre, and you need your board for that. You need the board there so kids can come up themselves and write on the board. Another little warm-up exercise I do during the week if I have a summer camp is have a graffiti board where kids can come up and use the markers to write whatever they want, whatever slogan they want on the board, and that can be quite interesting and help to get to know kids as well. So, but you need your board and markers for teaching purposes. Don't assume that they'll be there in the venue when you get there, because sometimes they're not. So make sure that they're there. Secondly, don't assume that pens and papers will be at the venue, either in the school, indeed, or especially if it's TY, and especially if they've had a kind of a boring TY, they couldn't be bothered to bring in pens and papers, or they'll pretend they don't have them or whatever. But also, if you're working in libraries with talented teens, just make sure that there's pens and papers available for everybody, because messing around at the start of a class and trying to get everybody a pen and paper, it looks you look incompetent basically, even if it's not your fault. So make sure those supplies are there. I would also recommend, especially if you're working with kids for longer than a couple of hours, that you get the venue, the library, or the festival, or whatever it is, to supply them with soft drinks. And pizza, at lunchtime. Really good idea, because it gets the kids talking to each other. It gets them, it gives them something to look forward to. It works as a kind of a reward, and it kind of helps the atmosphere and the sense the kids have of having some ownership over the situation that they're in. And the more they feel ownership and the comfort with the situation that they're in, the more creative they're going to be. So, I really don't want to underplay the importance of setup and warm-up. Hugely important, because if you get it wrong, nothing's going to happen. Open room policy. I would always have an open room policy with kids, and that means that kids, if they want to leave the room, to go to the toilet, or as comes up quite often with, kids that are suffering from anxiety or any kind of special need, and they need to go out and have a bit of fresh air for themselves or whatever. Explain at the start that, look, you don't have to tell me this is for talented teens. You don't do this in schools. You can do this with your talented teens. Explain, if you want to leave, you don't have to, ask me my permission. You can go, come and go as you please. And you should have trust in kids that's okay, because if they're there to, learn about writing, and they really want to be there, and they're volunteering in terms of talented teens and outside school venues, that doesn't cause any hassle. It just makes them more comfortable, especially for special need kids or kids that might have some issue that means they have to leave the room pretty often, and it saves an awful lot of embarrassment for them, having to ask you and, explain to you and all that sort of stuff. So put yourself on side there. Another question that comes up with setup for teens is around, say, phones. Now, I always allow kids to use their phones for research purposes and creativity purposes, and I really feel that I'm doing something, that will help them to sort of, not use the phones for, silly purposes or distracting purposes. So, they're going to be integrating with smartphone devices all their life, and smart devices in work and stuff like that. So, really, our position as teachers is to show them how to use them for positive reasons. Is that what I do? With music and headphones and stuff like that, when kids are doing their individual exercises, when we do that, I allow kids to put on music, put on their headphones, and work away, because some kids like that, some other things like that, as long as they're not too loud. So again, if you're if you want to get on side with kids, don't be a disciplinarian around technology. It really will make you look like you don't know what it's for. And most kids, especially the talented teens that have turned up, will have a positive relationship with technology, and they'll know how to use it for research purposes and creativity purposes, and to help them concentrate in the case of music. So you need to trust teenagers in that regard, and don't be getting hung up or upset about smart devices and so on in the room. Okay, let's have a think about some themes which you might want to use in your class design and lesson planning and exercise and game invention with teens. Teens beginning with, music and movies and Netflix or teen drama. They're very interested in all that. They'll have kind of a natural sense of the structure of a song, which you can use in songwriting and poetry workshops, and so on. They will again have a natural sense of the structure of movies, particularly the kind of movies that are aimed at teens, and they'll have a kind of, again, and they'll have watched a lot of these fantasy vampire type of programs until up very recently, and now more kind of teen melodrama, teen paranormal shows that are on Netflix. So having all of that, in the back of your mind when you're designing exercises and relating to that is a good idea. What you might call teen life, mostly to do, I think, with growing up, with going through puberty, with the different experiences that teens tend to have, the different developmental stages that they go through, with their kind of their struggle with identity, their kind of naivety and interest and development in terms of relationships. If you can find ways of integrating that interest into your work, and I'll be looking at exercises that do all of these later on, but just setting up the framework now for the moment. Teens are also very interested in the idea of the end of the world, always have been, and I've never seen a happier group of teens than when I walk in and say, today we're doing the apocalypse. A huge amount of exercises you can do around the apocalypse, from both utopian and dystopian exercises, as we'll talk about soon. Kids are also interested in current affairs, particularly but not exclusively current affairs as it does with them. They often have a kind of a very strong, I suppose, sense of morality, and some kids are very interested in international affairs. Some kids are very interested in identity politics, so to speak, and you need to integrate that in. Not every kid, but some of them will. A lot of kids like satire, fun stuff, memes and fake news and all that kind of stuff, and comedy sketches which gently satirize the world of politics and celebrity and so on. So that kind of goes together with current affairs and can be integrated with it. Kids, as they've always been, are interested in the stories of the fantastic and the paranormal. And the trick here is, of course, to bring them home, so that instead of a UFO story, it's UFO lands in Naas if you're teaching in Naas, or UFO lands in Clonakilty if you're teaching Clonakilty, etc., etc. So the trick with that sort of stuff, the fantastic and the paranormal, is to locate it in the local areas. So I recently did a digital storytelling project. That is, I made a video based on local ghost stories and local tales of the paranormal, kind of half made up and half lore of the area and half made up during the class. And we went around in locations, and a kid would tell the story of the ghost in the Omniplex in one place, and another kid would tell the story of the ghosts in Carlow Castle in another place. So I kind of rooted that interest in the paranormal and the fantastic in local areas, and let kids kind of work with local lore and then fill it out themselves. Heroes and superheroes, huge with kids. And an awful lot of exercises you can do with that. But again, the Marvel Comics thing is very big. Superpowers are very big. And because, again, it's another way of kids kind of indirectly expressing themselves and telling you about themselves and so on. If you work with them on, what superpower would you choose if you could choose one, and what would you do with that, and all that sort of stuff. So, and heroes exercise and superheroes are a good way to focus kids on values and actions in the world, and what kind of person and world we need to live in, and things like that. Can be very good for kids. They can really love that sort of stuff. So, and I named a number of kind of teams that you can work with there and design your own exercises on, really ideally. And when it comes to designing exercises and projects for your class, if you match those kind of general themes we've talked about up with these kind of teen genres, I would call them. Of course, they're not exclusively interested in by teens, but lots of different people like them. But particularly teens are working in these genres, or expressing themselves in these genres kind of naturally, without the interference of teachers or the education system. So, as I say, being client-centered means you go with what the kids are interested in themselves and with their contemporary creativity, rather than that old kind of idea that we have kind of inherited from our very slow-moving institutions about literary creativity. The first teen genre that is hugely popular, not with every kind of kid obviously, but with an awful lot of them, is performance or slam poetry. If you don't know what that is, About time you found out, frankly. So go onto YouTube and put in Irish spoken word or spoken word playlist or performance poetry playlist and have a look at what's out there and think about how you can integrate that into your teaching practice. Fantasy, as I said the last time, and particularly dystopian and utopian fantasy, as I have there. So exercises, like I say, to do with the end of the world or the world after the end of the world, or with utopian places or perfect worlds, or if teens ran the world, or redrawing the map of the world, or 5 things you would change in your local area. So anything that is to do with kids kind of, changing the world or imagining changes in the world, whether positive or negative, usually appeals very much to them. Now, impro and cosplay are something that I would work with a lot. So one thing that you can do yourself for a one-off class, for example, just bring a bag of hats that you've bought in the Vincent de Paul, and first of all put different hats on yourself, stand silently in front of the class, and let the kids observe and think about how simply that one prop changes you, and let the kids come up with different names for you and different characters for you according to which hat you've got put on. Then you can get the kids to pick out a hat, and the other kids to come up with a character, and also kind of a story for that character, maybe based on the locality. So lots of different things you can do with cosplay. Also getting kids to bring in their own costumes and their own fancy dress stuff, and mixing that up and swapping their own can be great fun for kind of impro or cosplay exercises. Manga / webcomic. This is comics of contemporary comic. And getting kids to draw or use photographs to come up with photo stories as well, I should say. So any kind of illustration / photography plus text will work with kids. Vlogging, doing that vlogging on the wisdom of teens or teen lives, or 10 tips for Halloween teen fun, or anything like that, anything to do with vlogging, or what it's like to be a teenager in Leitrim, etc, etc, etc. And digital storytelling, just referring back to that Carlow project I talked about. That means basically using video to tell stories. It's not short film making, it's not acting, and it's not it's not kind of Hollywood or anything like that, but it is the kids using the different elements of the of video and photography and things like that, and audio, and mixing them up to tell stories. So with digital storytelling, you would add a lot of sound effects and maybe some effects and things like that you can work into your video practice over time. They like satirical sketching, kids a lot. They like taking the mickey. They like taking the Mickey out of authority figures in particular, and out of local authority figures as well, I find. So getting them to do mockumentaries about the time that John F. K. JFK landed on a flying donkey in the local graveyard or whatever. Okay, you make it up what they're making their mockumentary. Also get them to do kind of fake news radio broadcasts, and maybe introduce them to that with kind of Orson Welles' War of the Worlds trick, which fooled everybody into thinking that aliens had invaded Earth. So get them to do fake news stuff. They really like that, and you can do that as a podcast, of course, podcasting or / community radio, getting the kids to come up with stories, news stories, reports that are kind of half true or untrue, teaming it around Halloween or whatever, and doing a podcast. Fan fiction, huge with kids. If you haven't heard of it, it's basically kids, tell their own stories that they make up using characters from stories that they themselves are really like. So Harry Potter has a huge kind of fan fiction side product, if you like, and getting kids to pick their favorite characters from books, interviewing those characters, putting those characters into different stories, mixing up characters from different stories they're familiar with can be fun, right? Debate, kids will sometimes be used to debate as well. It's one of the forms that they do a lot in schools, but you can add a creative twist to that by getting them to debate silly issues, or made up issues, or getting them to put forward absurd manifestos, and so on and so forth, and to argue in favour of those. So add your little fictional or creative twist into the usual debating, the same way that we talked in the last exercise about remember the school magazine of Pure Lies. So take all of these forms that I'm talking about that teens tend to be interested in, and finally something that they're really interested in is of course songwriting. And you should really, creative writing. Bob Dylan did win the Nobel Prize, so there's no excuse for not including songwriting now in a creative writing class. So again, that would encourage kids. I would always encourage kids, if I have them for a summer camp, to bring in their instruments, and we can end up with a class band, or even doing a little class play that has music involved in it, or you're writing songs, helping kids to write songs, or splitting them up into little groups to write songs. And there's lots of skills involved in writing songs. And they love doing it, so I do highly recommend that you integrate that in, and don't be doing the old haiku or the sonnet or the villanelle or any of that old fogey stuff. Bring in, come right up to date and do songs and performance poetry and cosplay, all of that stuff that teens are into. It's all creativity. It's their creativity. It's all, and you should be building out of that, rather, like I said, in institutional notions of what literature or creativity is, because institutions are not the are not the source of creativity. Young people are, generally speaking. So take your lead from them, go with their themes, their genres, and frame your own teaching according to that, and you won't go far wrong then. Moving on now to discuss some projects which have been tried and tested, that are up to date, multimedia, client-centered and teen-oriented. And the first of these is the poetry film. Poetry films have become a really important part of the poetry world in the last 10 years, and some films have been massive hits and received millions of views and things like that. And a lot of the kids will already be aware of these, but as well as that, it's a very, very convenient way to not scare them off the idea of doing poetry, and to kind of gently enter them into the multimedia world of contemporary poetry. So you'll be showing them what's actually going on in poetry in the 21st century. Like I've talked about, you'll be up to date as a teacher, and you'll be appealing to them to use their skills and interests with this. So the first thing you do is to do with skills. This, by the way, could be run over a couple of days, maybe. You could possibly squeeze it into a day if you had very high-level kids, but you could also, do it in school as a 4 to 6 weeks project if you had a couple of double classes every week or things like that. But anyway, the first thing you need to do in the class, if you're going to make a poetry film, is you do a skill survey. So you find out if there's any kids who are skilled with cameras, or even have cameras, have good cameras on their phones, if they've ever made a video or anything like that. You'll usually find that there's 2 or 3 who have had, or a couple who are willing to learn and have the basics and so on. So you'll find also that some kids will be good at drawing. Like I've already said, you'll use them for storyboarding later on. Some kids will have acting skills. Some kids will have been involved, in various organizational ways with doing drama or films and things like that. So you find out what you've got, including musicians, by the way, of any kind, because you do need a soundtrack for a film. Even a short one like a poetry film. You then show example videos, and I have a list on the in the next slide, which I'll talk to you about. But you can also make your own list, and that's what I'd really advise you to do. Not work off my list, but work off your own. If you look up Irish spoken word for example, on YouTube, you'll find a playlist there with about 250 poems, film poems and live poems and things like that. If you look up the Zebra Poetry Film Festival on YouTube or Facebook, you've had countless examples of poetry films. So you have a general discussion then about the example poems that you've shown, and you ask the kids to find a favourite out of the ones that you've shown. Now, the first discussion I've got there, number 3, will be to do with the themes, and what the poems are about and the content and all that, and that's a way of easing kids into it. You then ask them to find their favourite. You show them again. You asked them this time to focus very particularly on the technical side of things. So how do the images in the film poem relate to the content of the film poem? Tell them to think about the editing of the film, where the cuts are made, what effect those cuts have, what kind of effect on the meaning of the poem, the location in the film, and all of the kind of symbols and so on that are used in the poem. What effect they have to on making the meaning of the poem and making the poem effective. So talking about the technical side of things, and get a discussion going on that, and get the kids kind of aware. It's very important to get them aware of the connection between kind of technical skills and effective content. Okay, and how they are how they combine in different ways in the different film poems that you show them. Now let's have a look at the 5 or 6 that I recommend. Okay, so here's 6 which make the point about how effective poetry films can be, I think, and how various they can be. They're mostly Irish here, but I have a couple of Americans put in as well. Up the top there I've got my Because I'm Human poetry film, which is an anti-bullying poetry film, and is kind of collaboratively made, so there's about 10 or 15 people acting in it, so I think it's quite a good one to show to kids. They're all amateurs, and they've all got a few lines each in it, and it's got a strong theme and relevance, so I think that's a good one. If you want to poetry films are great for kind of discussion, almost civics type classes, or political and social classes. Coke poem by Carl Parkinson, great poem about I suppose the evil of cocaine, the stupidity of cocaine, stupidity of the drugs overall, but coming from someone who has been through the drug thing, and from an inner city area in Dublin. Very effective, very powerful. American woman Savannah Brown, brilliant young writer, brilliant young performer. This is a very simple film poem, Hi, I'm a Slut, where she takes on kind of sexist notions of what young women are, and so on and so forth. So great. I've had such brilliant discussions with both boys and girls based on that poem. I really recommend it, really gets them going. To This Day by Shane Koizan is another very famous anti-bullying poem. This is up there with the 3 or 4 million views, and it's an excellent piece of work, and again we'll get kids thinking on themes that are kind of relevant to them, to their teen life, as we spoke about before. Then there's a very recent hit, Emmett Kern, Heartbreak, which is to do with female bodily autonomy, and that again has been a huge hit in Ireland and generated a huge amount of discussion. I think you're up there at about at a couple of 100,000 views for an Irish poetry film, which is 10% of the population or whatever, 5% of the population. Fabulous. And then one last in the Irish language by Louis Depere, who's a more kind of sort of symbolic, imagistic. The poet doesn't feature much in this, but lots of symbols and lots of images, and in the Irish languages. So again, it'll get kids focused on that technical side of things, which we do want them to get, and also Irish language. It'd be great to have more Irish language film poems, and as is often the case with the Irish language stuff, it's very high production values. A lot of good Irish language film poems on YouTube. Also a really good one from Nuala Nicole, if you want to have a look at that. But I just like Louis' one. I think it's very effective. Like I say, do make your own list of these and do go through them yourself and find ones which would be appropriate for your teens and the situation that they're in, and really kind of try and be inspiring to the teens so that you'll get them kind of worked up and enthusiastic about doing their poetry film, and these are a few that will help with that. Okay, once again, what I'd suggest you do then is have a discussion focusing on the attributes of filming poems, or poems that are suitable for filming, and getting the kids to start thinking about what poem they would like to film, whether they would like to choose one of their favourite poems, whether they would like to write a poem, or so on. But anyway, you need to guide them with a discussion about the attributes of the filmic poems that you've watched, so that they have an idea of the type of poem they need to either write or to choose, okay, and that's informed by this discussion. So poetry films are generally shorter than 5 minutes. They're often a lot shorter than 5 minutes, and I definitely do not recommend going over that, because we don't have the audience doesn't for video and online is usually for something between 3 and 5 minutes. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And it's a bit long-winded for a poem if it goes over 2 or 3 minutes really, but 5 minutes let at the limit. A poem for film, and some poems are kind of coded, riddly, difficult to interpret, and you can have great fun with those. So writers like T.S. Eliot or Wallace Stevens, for example, or indeed Sylvia Plath, whose language is quite difficult, or Emily Dickinson, and just suggestive and connotative rather than denotative. I wouldn't recommend those for film poems for teenage writers. Of course, different matter if you're an adult artist, but we want poems that are kind of relatively unambiguous, whose meaning is basically clear to the audience, and you want poems that have a strong and relevant theme. Women's liberation, we've had a couple of those there, anti-bullying, anti-war, anti-racism, all that sort of stuff that teenagers can be very passionate about. I'd recommend something with a strong and relevant theme and content. So, that's kind of important for teens. An element of drama and narrative, so there's some opening in the poem for, acting out or performing, or the use of props, or, it's a poem that has a kind of a beginning, middle and end in it, if you like. as well as a message, so keeping that in mind. Strongly suggestive of certain images and symbols, so the poem should have, some strong images and strong symbols that you can work around in terms of filming, in terms of propping, in terms of possibly making, symbols and props and so on to put into the film. And that the most important thing really about a poetry film is that it's kind of accessible to an intelligent general audience. Again, not something you want to be going over the heads of people on, not kind of weird, surreal poems, but poems that have a strong message and a strong theme that are kind of understandable by everybody within, say, the school community or the youth club community. And if it has a sort of relevance for everybody in the community and everybody can understand it, then you have made quite a good creative breakthrough with your kids if you work that out. Right, and then like I said, this should be run sometime, over 2 days really minimum, if you can do it at all, with teenagers or in a school, with the double classes over 4 to 6 weeks, or even longer really, you wouldn't want to rush this at all. So the more time you spend with kids, or as part of a summer camp or something like that. So kids then, have to either write a poem in their groups. I would suggest that they kind of write collaboratively as well as make the film collaboratively, or they select a poem from a list that you have prepared for them of poems that you might think are suitable for filming, or and you can have a look through maybe there's stuff on the Leaving Cert, or curriculum poems that you can use. I'm sure there's quite a lot. I've used poems by people like Ted Hughes and Sylvia Plath and all that kind of stuff, that are they're simpler poems, if you like, to make. And I've also mostly though made films with kids that out of poems that they've written themselves. Okay, so they write or they select the poem, and then they storyboard the poem. And I've got a little picture of a storyboard there, as you can see. Storyboard is simply, a matchstick man drawing of how the film will look, okay, and how the different scenes will look and how they'll kind of unfold out of each other with a little bit of text underneath, and everybody involved in the film has a copy of that so that everybody's able to kind of imagine in advance how the film is going to look when you set it up. They didn't rehearse, basically rehearse everything to do with the film, especially learning their lines off. You don't obviously read from a piece of paper in front of a camera. You need to learn it off. So probably, again, depending on the level of the teens you've got, probably best to give them a few lines each. Make it as easy as you can. They didn't shoot the film. There should be one in every group that has a smartphone, preferably an iPhone with iMovie on it, and that is able to shoot. Better still if you've got 2 or 3 in each group, so they can shoot from 2 or 3 different angles, and so on and so forth. If they don't know how to shoot a film on the iPhone, then you're going to have to show them. So of course you're going to have to learn how to do that yourself, but that's an essential skill for creative writing teaching, or for the creative writing world completely. So I kind of do expect people to go away and figure out how to do that if you don't know already, because you will be massively disadvantaged, handicapped if you don't. You didn't edit the film in iMovie, simple editing program that some of them will know how to do already. You may have to use your little projector or your laptop or whatever to guide them through how to do that, but the point is at the end that they're able to do it. Believe me, a lot of the kids will pick this, if they don't know, will pick it up a lot quicker than we pick it up, so don't panic over anything like that. And then the distribution, again, there's different ways to distribute. Different festivals I get involved in, we might put the films on for the festival audience, or an invited audience to do with the festival, and to do with youth in the area and stuff like that, or we can distribute through institutional / personal social media. So the festivals Instagram, the festival's YouTube site, and the kids' own. So you can get quite a good views for poetry films when they're done like that. Generally speaking, again, we don't put audiovisual content kind of publicly on the internet, but it's fine to put it to get unlisted or private, if you like, and just to certain people who can view it. Okay. An exercise which I often use with teenagers, and which is very good for getting to know them, is a non-fiction exercise, which is a development of the hero and quest story, which I spoke about for younger teens. So this is one I use in summer camps a lot, and also when I have teens for a few weeks. It's one that I always do with them in maybe 3rd or 4th week. So it'll be day 2 of a summer camp. Maybe I'll talk about that later in a little bit more detail. So the first thing you do is you use the board, and you say, what is a hero? You ask the kids to tell you what they think a hero is, and then you ask them what are the attributes of a hero. So you fill the board up with whatever they suggest. It'll be something like brave, hardworking, strong, unselfish, motivated, persevering, honest, and so on and so forth. You get a different group of those attributes. But that will get it warmed up, and then you ask the kids who's their public hero, who's the hero that in public life, in music or sport or history, and sometimes kids will have a fictional hero as well, which is fine. They'll often ask about that, can it be a superhero, and that's absolutely fine. Let them do it whatever way they want to do it. So perhaps somebody like Brian O'Driscoll or Katie Taylor, or somebody will come up from sport, other famous musicians, Ed Sheeran, and so on and so forth. And you ask the kids to match the attributes to that public hero that they have. Illustrate 3 or 4 of the attributes that you have up on the board, and then you start to talk to them a little bit about obstacles. What obstacles did that person overcome in order to succeed in their chosen field and become a hero? And what is their overall quest? Maybe it's Brian O'Driscoll's quest to be the best rugby player in the world, or Katie Taylor's quest, for example, to be the world champion professional boxer, and so on and so forth. So they then can write out as a non-fiction exercise the story of their public hero, and how they overcome obstacles and achieve their quest. And that's a nice non-fiction exercise that the kids will have their own knowledge about. You'll find that kids are very knowledgeable about their heroes, much more so than you will be, and it's a good chance for them to show off about something that they really know a lot about, and that gives them a lot of creative self-confidence then, because like I say, they're working from their own world and their own culture, and so on and so forth. So you develop that exercise, you can stretch it out then, and you ask them about their private hero. Who in their private life, who do they know that they would count as a hero, who has overcome huge obstacles to achieve a certain quest? And kids will come up with answers like, a family member who overcame cancer, their father who lost his big job and went on to form his own business, and so on and so forth. They'll always have an answer for that, a private hero, and then get them to write that out as a non-fiction exercise and feed back on it afterwards. And this will take up, a couple of hours, a 2 to 3 hour workshop as part of a summer camp or a few days that you have with teens, and it's a very, very good exercise for them. Okay, so here's a basic plan for a summer camp with teens. I've been running summer camps with teens for about 10 years now, and over time I've kind of developed a pretty good plan for how to work with them and to keep them moving along towards a good outcome at the end of the week, and make sure that the kids are kind of set up for creativity from the very beginning. So this is just putting down Monday to Friday. Obviously you can pick and choose if you're doing a shorter summer camp, or you can use this as well for a short course at junior cert or anything like that. So you on the Monday, the warm-ups, as we talked about earlier on, and one of the things I talked about in the warm-up was getting the kids to come up with a fake identity for themselves, a fake name, and let them work away on that for a while, and come up themselves with their individual kind of characteristics, a little bit of story about themselves, their fake name, their pseudo identity, who they are, what they're interested in, where they live, all that sort of stuff, and then get them to interview each other about the characters that they have become. So partner them up, A and B, and A interviews B about B's character, B interviews A about A's character, and in that way the kids can have quite a lot of fun doing that. Then move on to the hero stories exercise, which we've just talked about, and that will do you for one day. Now the homework is never kind of physical but always mental, especially in summer camps, and is to do with kids going away and having to think for themselves. So on Monday, my homework would be, go away this evening now and think about something that you really love, and that you really like doing, and that you are a place that you really like, a person that you really like, a thing that you really like. Following day, do a little bit of a class on poetry, and ask them to write poems of praise. Okay, what I would also do on Tuesday, then I would move and get them to come up and read those poems of praise out in front of each other, so they kind of get comfortable with doing that a little bit. That will take up the first half of your recommended kind of 3 hour class with a break every day on a summer camp. The second thing I would do on Tuesday would be what I call a wisdom story or a wisdom exercise, and you start that rather conversely by asking the kids to tell you the stupidest thing that they've ever done, and giving you examples like leaving their baby brother in the fun fair, leaving the door open so it got burgled, throwing a stink bomb at a policeman on Halloween night or something like that, and then ask them what they learned from it. Okay, so the funny thing about wisdom, as you might say to them, is that it always comes from stupidity. stupidity. So ask them about stupid things they did and what they learned from it, and get them to write that out as a story. And if you want to, then get them to pair up in terms of with drawers or illustrators in the class, and get them to write out a cartoon, which can be quite funny. About their wisdom story, the stupid thing they did, and what they learned from it. At the end of the wisdom story, you can board a little bit about Proverbs. The Proverbs that I generally use are William Blake's Proverbs of Hell, and you can work away with them and talk about how Proverbs kind of condense the wisdom of hundreds and thousands of generations of human beings down into one little sentence, one little aphorism, and you can ask them then to boil down their wisdom story down into a little proverb or slogan. You can then make a little short video with them, get them all to stand around the room in different places and speak their wisdom, the thing that they have learned from their stupidity, just that one sentence, that one slogan, make a little video edited in iMovie and so on. And then homework on Tuesday is to bring in all the kind of costume Halloweeny stuff they have around, sitting around, any kind of props they have, any kind of drama stuff they have, any kind of silly stuff they've picked up in for costumes over the years. And this is fantastic because the kids will come in then Wednesday normally with a pile of stuff, could be drawn down from the attic and going back 30 or 40 years, but what you do is you get to multipile on Wednesday morning, you get to multipile their different costume stuff in the middle of the room, and then you get them to come up and pick out 3 or 4 things from the pile, not their own, not the thing that you brought down. So you say individually, then you stand them up in front of the class in their new kind of costumes, and you brainstorm with the class to come up with a character for them, okay, new character for them based on the cosplay, the costumes they're wearing. Now, you insert these characters into stories by breaking the kids down into groups of 3 or 4 and making them place the characters on a visit to the local town where you're doing the summer camp. So Middleton, Bantry, Fermoy, Louth, Ballydehob, wherever you are. The characters, the weird and strange characters that they've come up with, are visiting the local town, and they are doing so for some, on a quest reason, for maybe nefarious reasons or maybe positive reasons. Maybe they're involved in an interstellar detective mission or something like that. The kids will come up with a lot of proposals for that themselves in their little groups, and then you get them in their groups to write out fake news stories. And if you have time and you're inclined and you have the skills, you would make a sort of a fake news podcast, or even kind of set them up as kind of news readers in the room and get them to read out the news and make a little film of it. Okay, so then that evening you tell them that tomorrow we're going to be making story films. So their homework that evening is to watch a YouTube, a couple of films on a couple of poem films on YouTube, and also to read up a little bit on the internet about storyboarding, because they will be doing storyboarding and combining those textual skills with the drawing skills, as I say. So Thursday you do the slam poem exercise and make a little film of them performing their slam poems and edit it together with them and put it together. So you're doing the two things together. We've looked at kind of a longer term film project. You'll have to kind of narrow that down and just film them slam. So you combine the poem that they write together with their with a film, and you edit it out for them. So that's Thursday. Thursday evening is just for them to think about what piece they would like to perform for their friends and guardians the next day, or what they would like to show, or you have to give them the option of not performing and trying to find some other job for them then, introducing people or something like that, and give as much of the space over to the kids as you can. And Friday then for your summer camp is your revision, your rehearsal and your performance, okay? And that usually rounds off a very good week, and kids are delighted and parents and guardians are delighted as well. So, you can, the point of doing this in this way is that over the week you see that you're kind of doing a lot of multimedia, you're working a lot with what the kids have got themselves, and you're letting them have a bit of fun, a little bit of identity play and a little bit of fun around the fake news and things like that as well. So it all works pretty well. It's worked really well for me, this kind of approach, multi-skilled and client centre over the years as a summer camp, and I keep getting asked back to do summer camp, so it must be working in different places. Okay, so that's what I recommend. Again, I would urge people to go in with a plan which is multi-skilled and client centred, whether it's anything like this or not.